everyone. I'm Eve Rickert. I'm the founder and publisher at Thornapple Press. We are an independent publisher of books on love, relationships, and sexuality based in Victoria, Canada. I am currently joining from Duwamish territory in Washington State in the United States. And I'm here with Jessica Fern, who is the author of this amazing book, Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Nonmonogamy, which came out in 2020. And her newest book, the Polysecure Workbook, which has been out for just a few weeks. We're recording just past the winter solstice in December 2022. Jess, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Jessica Fern. Thank you. I'm the author of Polysecure and the Polysecure Workbook. Yeah, I'm just delighted to be here today with you.
Great. So what we're doing with these videos is we have decided to feature each of our authors in an interview with me, discussing their books and their work and anything else that we decide we want to talk about. And Jess has agreed to be my first interviewee. So Jess, I wanted to talk to you first about Polysecure, and it's been out for just over 2 years, and the response to it has just been incredible. And what need in among non-monogamous people, among non-monogamous people, but also in the world at large, do you think that Polysecure filled?
Yeah, I think it filled a few, and some of them I didn't know till afterwards, right? Till after it came out.
Mm-hmm.
But initially it felt like, as non-monogamous people are making multiple attachments, right? That attachment theory is really relevant to the non-monogamous experience. But of course, at that time, the majority of the literature on attachment was very heteronormative, mononormative, and even had hints at, depending on the author, of really pathologizing non-monogamy as an insecure attachment expression. So there needed to be something that addressed this, is what it felt like, and bridge the gap of, well, how do we apply what's really wonderful about attachment theory and understandings to people who are practicing non-monogamy?
Right.
Yeah. So that felt like the, big impetus for the book. And then a lot of the feedback I've gotten that it's really helped people make sense of their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right, of their own attachment experience, but their own non-monogamous journey, right, of especially when it's been really hard. Why is this so hard? Especially if I feel myself to be wired this way, or I genuinely want this,
Mm-hmm.
which is different than people who don't want it, right? But
Yeah.
why is it still hard? And so a lot of people found like language is what they would tell me to make sense of what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, in terms of the language that people found to describe their experiences, and why is it so hard for some people?
Yeah. I mean, I think the language that people would say, understanding that because there's less structure in a non-monogamous experience, right, that in itself can create insecurities, right? And so people's attachment anxiety, which might have never shown up before, can start showing up. Right, that sometimes the unintentional inconsistency or uncertainty of multiple non-monogamous relationships can mimic the conditions of an insecure attached experience.
Mm-hmm.
Or for sometimes the couple that has been monogamous and then opens up, it can start to mimic a disorganized attached experience where the person you want comfort from is the same person that you're feeling threatened by. Right. And people didn't know what was going on, and I think the most common language that people really resonated with was the idea of the primal attachment panic, right? That your partner is on a date and you're having a complete, physiological meltdown that seems pretty massive, right? And instead of being labeled as jealous, right?
Mm-hmm.
People going, oh, right. Like my nervous system is afraid that it's the feeling of I'm going to die because I'm disconnected from my attachment figure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that put into context a lot of what people were going through.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why the workbook next? And can you talk about how the workbook complements the book? And
Yeah.
if you have any recommendations for how to use it in conjunction with the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially we didn't think, right? You and I, the workbook was next. We had the
Uh-huh.
next book, right, on the horizon.
Mhm.
But there was a lot of requests for it pretty quickly. People would write me and they were excited. And when is their workbook going to come out? Right. So it was
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, people want more. That's amazing. And so, we made it happen. You loved the idea and we made it happen. And so, the workbook really brings people into a deeper level. So, it corresponds chapter by chapter with Polysecure and with even, kind of segment by segment, and just drills down with more questions, more contemplations, more, exercises to go through so that people really can have, I think, more guidance and more healing. Yeah.
Mhm. And I mean, just to mention for viewers and readers, the structure of the workbook pretty precisely follows the structure
Yeah.
of Polysecure. So same chapters, same topics. So it's really meant to be used in conjunction with the book. There's a little introduction to each chapter, but really you need to read the content of Polysecure to understand what the workbook is talking about. Um, but it's interesting, at the beginning, there's all of these questions about, childhood experiences, formative experiences that
Yeah.
impacted your attachment style. This is something personally that I've been working on in therapy this last year. Is really kind of digging into that early life stuff. And it's like I was talking to a good friend of mine recently, who has been doing something similar, and who was saying, "Oh yeah, it's like we got to be to our mid 40s and didn't really know ourselves,"
Yeah. Right.
and so, but at the same time, it can be sort of yucky. It's sort of like, oh, I really don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason. So, I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the benefits of doing that work, of like really
Yeah.
exploring those early experiences and like, sometimes kind of digging it up? um,
Totally. Yeah. Right. And of course, no one has to. Like, if you don't want to do the
mhm,
work, you don't have to. Right.
mhm,
And I think if someone really has had a traumatic past, doing this in conjunction with a therapist or a group
mhm,
can be really supportive for those
mhm,
things that come up that you might need to do different modalities to support, you know.
mhm,
But yeah, a lot of this is creating sort of a narrative, right? An
mhm,
understanding of like what happened, you know
mhm,
what were my experiences and how that shaped me into who I am, and the challenges that I'm facing as an adult in relationships, right? So it's really to bring more insight so that we can break out of the patterns,
mhm.
right? That's ultimately the point, is that we can live in choice instead of just living in reaction to our past.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that framing a lot.
Yeah.
Um, Something else that I noticed in the workbook is, in the nested model of attachment, um, you've added. I think this is new from Polysecure. You've added technology as a whole category affecting attachment, and I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to ask, what was the impetus behind adding that?
Yeah, I think I did. I think it was in Polysecure, but I think it's like in the workbook, it actually gets its own questions in a different way
Hmm.
versus the mention of,
Right.
where would we put technology in this model,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, it just in this day and age, it feels so relevant,
Hmm.
that and in the pandemic of the last few years, it's even way more relevant that the majority of our connections and even attachments are happening through the computer, through the phone, through
Hmm.
online communities. Yeah. And in the non-monogamous world, a lot of our relationships are through the phone, you
Yeah.
know? And it's not just like dating apps, but often we're not living with all of our partners. Right? So there's
Hmm.
a lot of things that are happening through technology to create attachment.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it feels like something that we can't ignore. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think has been the effect of that on our attachments? And is there anything we can do to sort of, um, improve or mitigate? those attachments when they're mediated by technology in that way?
Yeah, I think it goes in both directions. Like I hear, and I know there's been studies that I think show both directions. Like there's a negative impact where we're actually more connected on one level, but we don't feel as emotionally connected, attachment connected,
Mhm.
that the technology can sort of dilute things, right? Then yet I can see how we can stay in contact with certain people that we just wouldn't be able to, right? And it
Mhm.
brings us closer. It also creates a lot of attachment anxiety sometimes because there's the
Mhm.
whole, like, did you message me back? How long has it been? Was it read? Not why? Oh, you read it, but you didn't reply. Just like all these new ways to feel
Mhm.
insecure,
Yeah.
that just didn't exist before in the
Yeah.
same way, and yet also like with my relationship outside of the house, there's a level of support that I get
Mm.
through our WhatsApp chat that I'm so grateful for.
Mhm.
That is a way that when we're not physically together, we can stay really connected. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think we can leverage it in either way, and just I think one thing, from the therapist hat always is like, just please don't do conflict over the phone.
Mm.
Right? Like have your better, your more important conversations, at least live through talking, if not in
Mhm.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's where it can devolve quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure we've all had that experience
Yeah.
more than a
So,
few
right.
times.
Whoops. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned the nested model, and I actually wanted to ask you about that because that was something that was novel in Polysecure, something
Yeah.
about attachment theory that was novel in Polysecure. So one, I wanted, for those who are new to your work, if you could just briefly describe what that is, but then I'm also curious about what the reception to that has been.
Yeah.
And especially if there's been any mainstream pickup, if you found that it's becoming more widely accepted.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we can do a picture too of it
Yeah.
to help visualize. If you could pull that up, that would be
Yeah,
awesome.
that is
Yeah.
chapter 3, I believe, and,
Mhm.
here it is.
There we go. So these are nested spheres of self, relationship, home, local community and culture, the societal level, and the global and collective. So these are different levels of our human experience. Of course, we could probably add more, we could reduce it to less. And they're nested because they all impact each other. They're not actually separate. They're somewhat distinct, but all sort of within a whole. And, there's other fields of study that have some nested models, or sometimes they break things into, quadrants. But as I was sort of really digging into the attachment literature, it's often just described as the self level of what's your attachment style, what's your
Mhm,
attachment history, and then, what's going on in the relationship level. And while that's very important and usually where it's most relevant, it was like, wait, we're missing stuff, right? That people in poverty are at a disadvantage to attach with their children because they
mhm,
don't have that ability in the same way when you have to work 60, 70 hours a week just to barely pay your bills, right? So men, and things like sexism, racism, all the isms impact how we can attach, right?
mhm,
And so I wanted to bring that in to broaden our understanding and the scope of how we talk, because we could wind up reducing those experiences to a self level, and then
mhm,
we're missing a lot. Then we wind up blaming someone for their attachment style when it's really societal factors at play,
mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how we bond is such a cultural thing too. Like the parent child bonding expectations is very dictated by what the culture says is appropriate, not appropriate. Do you pick up your baby or breastfeed, all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Yeah.
So, what's been the reception to that since Polysecure
Yeah.
has come out?
I think, especially people who identify or are in marginalized groups and identities have really
Mhm,
appreciated this. I think people have felt really seen in it.
mhm,
Yeah. And appreciate sort of adding more complexity to attachment experience and really taking away a lot of the blame on the individual or even the relationship. Yeah, so people have seemed to like it a lot.
Um, this might be kind of a left field question, but I just was thinking about it as you were talking. Um, do you have any thoughts on the effect of capitalism on attachment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right? So,
Can you share them?
yeah, right. This will be one of those too that I'm like, "Oh, there's so many things I'll remember to say
Hmm.
afterwards." But I mean, yeah, capitalism gets us to believe that as individuals, our worth and value comes from producing, right?
Hmm.
That's a broken attachment right there, that my value and worth as a human is not just being here alive. It's only what I do, what I create, what I produce, how much money I have, what, you know, degrees and status that I have. And so many people I see struggling to in their attachment relationships because they don't feel worthy. You know, someone loses their job, they don't feel worthy of the love from their partner. They don't feel worthy to get a new partner because they're not, you know, holding up the capitalist standard.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the expectations that capitalism brings into like what is dating? What's a date? Right? Right, or what's a romance? And so much of that is influenced by how much money you spend and certain experiences that you have that, you know, people may or may not want on their own. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are initial
Um,
thoughts.
yeah. Um, a few years ago, I was in a talk. I was listening to a talk by Mia Mingus, who's
Mhm.
you know who she is. For those who don't, she's a disability justice activist and also very well known for her work in transformative justice, particularly with the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. And so I was listening to a talk that she gave on transformative justice, and one of the things she said that really has stuck with me is capitalism requires the severing of relationships.
Yeah.
And ever since, like, that was one of those things, like, galaxy brain moments where it just changed everything about how I see relationships. Because in order to become a diligent producer who is willing to put our bosses and our companies above everything else and make that central to our lives, we have to in order to have this focus on earning and accumulation,
Yeah.
we have to weaken those kinship ties, those community ties, those collectives of care that we might have relied on once. Because the more isolated we are, the more dependent we are on our own labor and what we can. That's certainly
Exactly.
something that I have felt, especially since being getting divorced a few years ago and realizing, like, oh, it's just me now.
Right.
How do I make sure I'm cared for? Well, I've got to make more money.
Right.
So um, it's a very hard trap to break out of if we don't have those networks that we can rely on to care for us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you're making me think about when my son was even younger and I
Mhm.
needed more community and support, you know, and just how hard it was with people who wanted to get together. We couldn't, you know, okay, I'll see you
Mhm.
once a month if we're lucky to get
Mhm.
together with our kids because we're working. We don't have time and we live separately. And the
Mhm.
separateness and isolation of our homes means that we have to do all these other things and can't be in relationships the same way.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So it put a lot of pressure too on that attachment relationship with me and my son because it's like it's just us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also very true. Again, with that isolation, it puts so much, um, just like compulsory monogamy does, it puts so much pressure on these few core
Right.
attachments.
Right. Exactly. I remember one of my first meltdowns as a new mom was like, I'm supposed to be an entire village? Like, I can't do
Hmm.
this. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like, where's the other kids that are gonna pick up and throw my kid around and entertain him? Like, I can't be, you know, all these roles that a village would supply, you know,
Hmm.
historically, right?
Yeah.
Or a community that was more entwined.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has
Yeah.
there been any pickup in kind of more mainstream therapeutic circles so far? that you've
I'm
seen?
I'm thinking it will, because I'm being
Hmm.
asked to teach. And often when I'm being
Right.
asked to teach to other therapists,
Hmm.
and that's what 2023 I'll start doing more of,
Hmm.
they want that in there,
Hmm.
right? They
Great.
want that lens. So it's great.
Yeah. So since Polysecure came out, one, is there anything that's really surprised you since the book came out, either about the reception or things you've learned? And then the other question related to that is there something that you've learned or changed your mind about since the book came out?
That's a great question. Um, yeah, I think I was just so pleasantly surprised about the bigness of the reception,
Hmm.
you know, and I just hadn't anticipated things like book clubs in other countries that would be
Hmm.
focusing on the group, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I was just like, and sometimes I'm still surprised when I get certain emails,
Uh-huh.
that people, their words, they're saying it's changed their life or it's changed their relationship. It's like, I think when I was writing and I was like, if just one person has like, benefits from this, this will be
Hmm.
great. So I think yeah, just it seems to have really filled a need, and it's incredible to me. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And is there anything that you've changed your mind about, or sort of added nuance in your understanding, or anything like that since it came out that's in the book?
That's in the book itself. I think, well, and I think probably the next book, I'm realizing I might be answering some of those questions, right? But just
Hmm.
in different language, right? Like
Hmm.
the next book coming out, Polly Wise, does talk about differentiation and codependency, and that's all relevant to attachment as well. So I think I get to go more into that in a certain way, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's probably like more things I wish like we didn't put anything in there about being attachment and being non-neurotypical neurodivergence. I mentioned a little bit about HSP, highly sensitive people. And it's a big topic. That's actually probably a book for someone else to write, not me, because
Mhm.
that's not my area of expertise. But I could see how that's a need that the book didn't fill, that potentially,
Like
people would like to
HSPs
hear.
and non-monogamy specifically?
Yeah, or really people who identify or are neurodivergent,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and how that being neurodivergent impacts their attachment experiences, right?
Mhm.
And their attachment styles.
Mhm.
And so I think in the world that someone needs to create that, right? And it's
Yeah.
very relevant because I think, there's a lot of crossover with that in non-monogamy.
Mhm. We do have, I'll just, give a
Oh,
little
yay.
plug here.
Yeah.
In just over a month, we have, probably it'll be closer by the time this video is released. We do have a little book coming out on non-monogamy and neurodivergence.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
But
great. That's
it doesn't cover attachment. And I do think
yeah,
that's a really interesting question.
right. It's sort of three spheres that are crossing
Mhm.
over. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know something that we've gotten some feedback about, and that's been shared with you as well, is asexuality,
That's right.
and how
Yeah.
that's covered in the book. So, and we did
Yeah.
revise it
We
at
did
one point.
revise it, and yeah, that was difficult because I even literally consulted with an asexuality expert, and they sort of
Mhm.
gave the go ahead with how we went with it.
Mhm.
But yeah, there were a few people who didn't like the way we did it. And so we have revised it.
Mhm.
And that would be another population that ideally needs their own book as well, that the book itself wasn't able to give enough into that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you mentioned, so you dropped a mention of Polywise.
Yeah.
So you wanna talk about that as well as any other projects that are in the pipe right now?
Yeah, Polywise. So, and as I say in the introduction, in many ways, that was always in my mind the first book,
Mhm.
because it was sort of the first body of work I came up with, and trying to
Mhm.
make sense of why is this so hard for folks,
Mhm.
right? I came up with, oh, here's sort of the 5 or 6 things, and attachment was one of them, right? And you were the one that was like, let's do a whole book on attachment. Like,
Mhm.
great. So Polywise is the other things that I see
Mhm.
as challenges. Yeah, and I So it's things like paradigm shifts are difficult, right? Just that in itself, how do you do a real paradigm shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we troubleshoot when there's resistance to making this transition or different transitions within being non-monogamous,
Mm-hmm.
for a long time?
Can you
Um,
mention a couple of those with examples would be?
yeah, of transitions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the most obvious one that gets the most, airtime is the monogamous couple transitioning to polyamory or non-monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
But within non-monogamy, there's so many transitions that activate all these challenges, right? So relationship escalations, relationship de-escalations,
Mm-hmm.
introducing a new partner into a polycule, changing the style of non-monogamy that you're practicing, right? Changing hierarchy, especially when we go from being more hierarchical to less hierarchical, right? These are all things that can activate, they can expose challenges in the relationship that weren't being exposed because it puts more
Mm-hmm.
pressure, right? They can expose codependency and struggles with, oh, we're not really differentiated. We thought we were. Whoops. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So things like that.
So just to mention,
Yeah.
Polywise is what's this? I think the subtitle is a deeper dive into navigating open
I
relationships,
think that's it. Yeah.
and that's it's coming out this summer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Summer
and
2023.
yeah, summer 2023, and beyond that, what's in the pipeline?
Yeah. I feel like I have a very full plate. So
Thank you.
I know, right? Thank you, right? Well, writing wise, we have a next book, which is going to be not so much about non-monogamy at all, but really about our inner critic and shame and the ways we escape.
Mhm.
And, in this moment, I think I'm calling it the shame triangle, which is inspired by the drama triangle, if people know that, and sort of the internalization of the drama triangle.
Mhm.
And what I've found that when people haven't dealt with their inner critic and their shame and the ways they escape, it's really hard to live a genuine life, an authentic
Mhm.
life, right? Versus being stuck in these roles, and these sort of patterns. So I'm
Mhm.
very excited about that one.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. I'm going to be teaching more to other therapists that, are
Mhm.
really wanting to expand their practice with more
Mhm.
polywise and polysecure concepts, which is
Mhm.
fantastic. Yeah, and then we were just saying I'll be doing a
Mhm.
retreat at Hollyhock in
Right.
Canada on secure attachment with self. And that's been like consistently, I keep being asked for more offerings for secure attachment with self. So people
Can
can,
you can you talk about that a little bit? What that means?
yeah,
That's I mean that's a central concept
it's
in
essential.
Polysecure and the workbook, but yeah.
Yeah, right. It's sort of the attachment relationship we have within ourself, right?
Mhm.
Being grounded in ourself, being available and attuned and responsive to ourself. In Polysecure, I have the hearts and how we apply that to the self, and it's relevant for anybody, right? But in non-monogamy, it's really needed more because we're navigating much more complexity. And if we don't have that sort of grounded anchor within, it's really hard, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're, people pleasing or in challenging situations.
Mhm.
Yes, I'm still developing that material, but it is going to be a lot about figuring out that inner anchor. A lot about working with shame and the inner critic is a really important piece.
Mhm.
Yeah. And healing the attachment style sort of through an internal family systems approach, probably.
Something that comes up a lot, I feel like in discussions about non-monogamy is that sort of tension and delicate balance between uh, that self work that we have to
Yeah.
do and the relationship work, and how much do we rely on the relationship for our to meet our attachment needs versus how much do we have to
Yeah.
rely on our self-soothing and our own personal security. um, it, how do you address that, for example, in your therapeutic practice,
Yeah.
because I expect that comes up a lot.
It does come up a lot. And a lot of times what I'll do if I'm working with partners, we'll have, group or couple sessions together, and then we'll even do individual to address sort of, okay, so this is more of a relationship attachment need that both of you or three of you, right, and more need to be tending to, versus, okay, that's really is more the way you're reacting, you're interpreting some of your history coming in here that needs individual work. It's rarely just one or the other.
And what tools do you use to kind of help discern that difference?
Good question. I think it's probably getting a sense when let's say I'm working with two partners, and I can get a sense of, okay, this partner isn't actually abandoning you, but you keep having a story that you're being abandoned. Let's explore this individually, right? So if I'm seeing that what we're doing in the relationship or what they've been trying to do in the relationship isn't tending to it, it's like, okay, then let's look at this at the personal level as well. What's coming up, right? Or your partner keeps saying the reassuring things you need to hear, but it's not landing. And sometimes that is, how do we refine that? Maybe they can say it differently, or there's a reason relationally it's not landing because they're saying one thing and doing another. But yeah, I think especially when people are in those transitions, I always ask, what part of you is struggling? And that's usually an indication of the need for some individual time.
Yeah. So, had a couple of questions from readers.
Ooh.
So one of them concerns the classic anxious-avoidant trap.
Yeah.
And the question is, if you find yourself in that trap, whatever side of it you're on, how good or bad is the prognosis really? Like, is that something that you can work your way out of? Are you doomed? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, meaning like if someone finds themselves in one of the classical styles?
Yeah, well, if you're already in a relationship and you realize that you're in, and maybe you can define for viewers kind of what I'm talking about, what the anxious avoidant trap is, but it's that sort of in all the attachment literature, sort of the
The distancer and the
classic,
pursuer,
right?
right?
So once you're in that dynamic in a relationship, um,
Are you doomed? Got it.
are you doomed? Yes.
Yeah, it depends.
Okay.
It depends how capable each person is to shift their own behaviors.
Mhm.
And often the reason I say it depends is because it's not just a behavioral shift, it's like a developmental shift,
Mhm.
right? So the person who's more in the avoidant, can they lean in, right? And not just pull away and withdraw, right? The
Mhm.
person who's, in more of the anxious, moving towards too much, can they lean back and find more of themselves,
Mhm.
right? So if both partners, if we're assuming this is a two-person dynamic, if they are able to do their own work and work on their own ways of showing up, yeah, I've seen people get out of it. It's amazing. You
Mhm.
know, I often see the one partner who's like really eager to change this and the other's not,
Mhm.
and that would be with any dynamic. Then like, what are we left with, right? You're
Right.
not showing up for what's happening between us, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
also find that sometimes that dynamic flips when people are in non-monogamy, right? And that's can
How
be
so?
surprising. Like the person who is more avoidant is now more anxious,
Mm.
or the person
Mhm.
who's been more anxious now feels more withdrawn.
Mm.
And
And is
sometimes,
that usually the result of a new relationship or
yeah, it can be the result of a new partner or a change in the way you're practicing non-monogamy. Again, usually
Mhm.
like changing the hierarchical way of doing a relationship. Um, and while that's difficult, it allows some really interesting things to work with because now that actually broke out of the original dynamic, right? Go,
Mhm.
oh, okay.
Right.
Because every style has the opposite in it too.
Mm.
And that's what most of us don't realize is the part of us that is anxious and preoccupied also is avoiding something.
Mm.
And the part that is, avoiding and withdrawn is often avoiding and sort of being dismissive of their own anxiousness, So when we
Yeah, I can
find
see
that peace, it can really turn things around. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That also reminds me of the next book after the next two books,
Yes,
which is
yes.
the avoidant attachment book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, that was sort of your request, right? Of like, oh, we don't have a lot on avoidant attachment. And what is out there is sort of just like, oh, they're narcissists, don't date them, right? Like it's
right.
sort of like oversimplified,
Yeah,
And
and I want to say that I made that request because it had been made to me by people who identified as who found themselves in avoidant attachment patterns and were saying, look, there's nothing out there for me. There's nothing out there that says anything other than I'm broken and undateable. So
yeah.
these are avoidant attachers who genuinely want to work on that, and there just aren't resources for them.
Yeah. And it seems like there's more on anxiousness, right? For the
Mhm.
anxious styles. So yeah, we're going to create a resource that's non-pathologizing and really honors the
Yay!
wisdom in this attachment style, right?
Yeah.
And the challenges and what do we do? How do we work through it? Yeah.
Mhm. So another reader question has
Question?
to do with, and this is kind of a fun one. Um, do cats and dogs have attachment styles like people? And do
I
they
love this.
vary, or do they have do they lean one way or another innately?
I love this because I am like a new kitty mama of the last year
Okay.
and a half. And I didn't know. It was like a dormant genetic condition of being like a cat lover that just arose. And now I'm like one of these people who's obsessed. I thought I was a dog person.
Uh-huh.
So I have been thinking about attachment in pets a lot, right?
Yay.
Yeah, so it's funny. So, I mean, it does seem like a cat is going to be more of that avoidant, dismissive style where it's more on their terms,
Mhm.
right? Like, I'll be affectionate when I want to be affectionate, not necessarily when you want to be affectionate. Right. Right. And there is a way, I think, what people don't realize with the avoidant dismissive style is when they do attach, it can be more like finally attached than almost anything I've ever seen. Like they won't unattach sometimes, right?
Mhm.
Similar, like if the cat chose you, you are the lucky one, right? Right. Whereas
Mhm.
dogs seem to have more of this in your face, like
Mhm.
right. And it's beautiful, right? They're like but they can have more of that anxiousness, right? They're like anxious when you're gone.
Mhm.
Of course, each animal is different too. Like I have two cats, and one of them I would say is securely attached. And she comes up. She also receives my affection and really loves it when I go to her. I feel her presence. She clearly wants to be around us. And yet she also goes out and has her own adventures. And then we have the other one that we're like, yeah, that's an avoidantly attached cat, right? Like
Yeah.
she's bonded to us, but she's doing her own thing. Yeah.
Yeah. My
Yeah.
last cat, I'm pretty sure, was securely attached, and my current cat, I think, has a disorganized attachment style.
Yeah, yeah, that might be
She's
this one too. Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
so interesting. Like they'll both go outside, and the one that's securely attached is just like her whole body posture is open and curious, and she's looking
Mhm.
around. And the other one is like, like immediately
Mhm.
skittish, and like on alert. And I was just like, oh, yeah, it's, to give credit to like when we're in that insecure style, just how
Mhm.
difficult it is for ourselves sometimes,
Mhm.
to have that nervous
Yeah.
system. Yeah.
Yeah, my disorganized kitty, she's always seeking proximity, but not too much. And
Yeah.
she can be very defensive about her space. And even like when she's on my lap, she's a little bit tense. She's like, I want to be here, but I'm not sure I want to be here.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and she's a rescue, and we don't know her history. So it's like
Yeah.
clearly there's some kind of trauma there. So
Yeah. And you see that with dogs, of course, too, when
mhm,
they've been mistreated and traumatized, they growl
mhm,
first, and yet they want connection at the same time. Right. So, yeah.
mhm, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these pets really have that bonding mechanism for sure. So we experience these attachment styles with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like we can learn so much from them too.
Yeah, and I had a dog from when I was 5 till 19, and I credit her to being like one of my resiliency factors.
Hmm.
Like here was
Yeah.
this securely bonded, attached pet that I had. Like, thank goodness, like
Hmm.
that was this real experience of unconditional love for me.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think our pets can play a huge role too in our own
Yes.
attachment healing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have anything that you want to add or that you want to ask me?
Oh, good question. I mean, right, how has it been on your end, is right, being publisher, right?
Um, I mean, it's been fantastic. I feel really honored to have, been the one to bring this book into the world. It's been a bit stressful because I don't know if you know this, but you've probably heard repeatedly about supply chain issues during the
Yeah,
pandemic, and that's something that's been hitting publishers really, really hard. There's been a paper shortage, for one thing, because for a number of reasons,
yeah.
just supply chains generally grinding, but also all of the at-home ordering that people are doing. Actually, there's a
Oh,
huge
yeah.
demand for pulp to go into boxes, and if the pulp is going to boxes, then it's not going to paper. So we're all kind of out there, trying to get a hold of these now very scarce resources. So there's paper shortages, paper delays. We can't always get the paper we want. There's been backups at we had I think it was 20 that's right, it was 2020 when we were trying to get the first reprint of Polysecure out.
Yeah.
um, our printer's bindery shut down because they had a COVID case, and everybody had to isolate, and so we were like, where are these books? And it was weeks, and then nobody was communicating with us, and that's just been like, it's been what it's been like for the last 2 years. So
Right.
it's like, wow, this book is doing so well, and every time we're like, oh wow, there was a huge order from Amazon, and now we suddenly have to order more copies and find a printer who can deliver them, and and then they don't have the paper, or they don't, so it's been and not just this book. I've had other books that's been an issue for. Last year, um had to get a reprint done, and we were trying to get it in time for an event on New Year's Day.
Mm.
And I ended up meeting the authors in the snow at the warehouse, because we were able to get the books all the way to a local warehouse. It was a local author, and we got the books all the way to a local warehouse, but couldn't get them to their door because it was
Oh,
snowing and they didn't have drivers. And so I met the authors in the snow at the warehouse on New Year's
and
Eve
hand delivered.
and deliver their books for their event the next day. So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a lot.
yeah. But mostly good problems to have. It's stressful, but it's good problems to have.
Yeah, right. Well, it's when we shift into abundance issues versus
Hmm.
deficiency complaints.
Right,
It
for
has its
sure.
issues as well. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and also I just feel it's really nice to be able to publish books that I feel like are really important and are making a positive difference.
Yeah.
Um, and it's doubly nice when those books are so successful. So
Right.
yeah, yeah, and it's enabled me to, you know, take on new titles, that I also
Mm.
think are going to be really important. So
Oh, that's
that's
nice to
been,
hear. That's
yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's too what's nice about being more with an independent publisher is there is more of the personal connection and personal touch, and
Hmm.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah.
We try.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where can people find you if they
Yeah.
want more of your work?
JessicaFern.com. People can sign up if you subscribe to my list. I don't send things out very often, so don't worry. But when, I'll send out if I'm going to be at a conference or there's a free talk or, things like that,
Mm,
a online summit, those kind of things. Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
great. Um, anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Thank you all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Eve.
you so much. This has been
Yeah.
great.